Hello, Janine. Thank you for being with us here in Tanzania.
Helena, it's always a pleasure to be with Hukoni and Railway children, and especially with you too.
Thank you.
We enjoyed our conversations over the years and your insights about the world and
Thank
books
you, Janine.
and reading.
Well, we're very grateful for all the work you've done in Hukoni. And I was wondering whether you could tell us what you see the role of story being in therapeutic work with children and families.
Yeah. And I always add that, and families, because stories are a way for us to enter into the world of the child, but as those stories become more available and come out, that's a way to connect with the family, for the family to enter into the child's world, and for the child to enter into the family's world as well, because we think in stories. And it's impossible to talk about problems or challenges or issues without telling a story. And so in that sense, stories are really foundational to any kind of therapy experience.
And how do you intentionally build a story as opposed to telling a story that isn't useful, or what differentiates a useful story from a not useful story for a child or for a family?
Well, I think one key thing is helping children to learn enough emotional vocabulary, and some of that can be just through nonverbal communication, like even doing a game like a mirror game where I'm trying to mirror your face and your body and how you're, and so we learn how to connect even without words and understand something about somebody's emotional experience by trying to mirror their face, their body position. So we can begin with some things like that seem on one level relatively simple, but for a parent and child to mirror each other, and for a child to feel like the parent is somehow in synchronicity with them right there is a way to begin to shape some of our internal experience. And I don't think it's necessarily helpful to think about a story not being useful, because in some sense there's some way that it can possibly be helpful. And so I think it's more like, what's the meaning to you? What does it mean to you as you begin to tell about a certain experience that you had? What does it mean to be listened to in particular ways and witnessed and heard? So like today when we had the workshop, I had people ask each other some questions about, when did you feel really heard? Were you listened to in your family or not? Were children listened to differently than adults, or men listened to differently than women? Because we want to be cognizant, because it's not just the telling of the story, it's really about the surround, the ambiance around the story in terms of how it's heard, how it's listened to, and how other people are witnessing it and taking it in.
So there's something of a validation that happens when somebody tells a story. It stops being a questioned experience, and
certainly if there's been abuse or violence and the child is afraid that people won't believe it, or somehow they won't take it seriously, or they will blame the child for what happened. Absolutely, that is central to it.
And can you tell us about a sort of an anecdote? I don't know if that's, an anecdote maybe sanitized, but an anecdote of having used stories in a real life situation, or a story that was told that was critical or pivotal in a relationship between a child and their family, or something that could help us see sort of in practice how this works, how you use it.
Well, there's a story. This was a young woman that I worked with actually early on in therapy. She was 12 years old and she had not walked on her own or talked for 2 years. And she was caught in the middle of a very conflictual, but not openly conflictual relationship between her parents. And so she froze, and she chose not to walk on her own or to speak. And I was terrified as a therapist because I thought, how can I possibly help this person? And I'd only seen 6 families before I was supposed to help this family. And I remember looking out the window of the residential treatment center that she was about to enter into. And her father was on the steps, literally picking one foot up, and her mother was pushing it from behind to, to walk her. I mean, they had this whole strategy about how they walked her. And for her, the steps in telling her story were first my telling her some stories, and stories that I made up that very much related to someone being trapped and being afraid to speak out against what adult figures were doing. So I tried to find some entrance into what she might be feeling. And then I would ask her, give her a special notebook, and I would ask her to write, like, as I'm telling the stories, what part of those stories meant something to her. And then I took those words and things, and then I built other stories from that. And we started to make a relationship about her story, even though she wasn't speaking. And ultimately, what we had to do with her was to get a parakeet that she would then teach to speak, because her parents felt like the reason she couldn't speak is because her vocal cords were tightened and needed to be relaxed and exercised before she would be able to speak again. And she had been hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital, and they had done some very aversive treatments with her, and just put her like out in the middle of the floor. If you want to eat, you want to go to the bathroom, you have to just get yourself up. And they forced her to speak if she wanted to get food. And but the parents were very upset that she talked to the psychiatrists and the nurses at the hospital first. So we knew that she couldn't speak to us first. They sent her home from that hospital, the psychiatric hospital, and within 3 months she was not walking or talking again. So we got this parakeet for her to have in her room at the residential treatment center, and she began to train it how to speak in private. And then we sent her on her home visits with the parakeet, so that when she was ready, she could begin to show the parents how she could now speak again. Wow. And that broke, that provided the opening so that she could then begin to tell her stories. But we had to do it in a way that respected the family, and where we were not seen as somehow more important to the girl than to the parents.
Gosh, what an extraordinary story.
And that family taught me so much. And that young woman, she went on, she invited me, she was in the treatment center for a year. She went back to the family, walking, talking, dancing, singing. And she invited me to her high school graduation. She graduated in a class of almost 700 students. And she led them. She was by that time in the chorus at the school, and she came out into this huge gymnasium leading the chorus, singing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And is there a recommendation that you would give practitioners, of sort of a couple of recommendations of how to begin to use more storytelling or allow space for more storytelling? Things that they should keep in mind to allow the story to be told? Or
I think it's very important to follow some of the pace and the rhythm of the family, and I think the story that I just told reflects some of that. And I think it's very important to find cultural aspects of storytelling that are meaningful to people, because people have different ways in which, they begin to tell stories, or they honor people before they tell stories, or have ways they end stories, like snip, snap, snout, the tale's told out. So taking cues from the people that you're working with, but also using artistic, because drawing, painting, games, using other forms to sometimes, if somebody's blocked about getting into a story, doing a drawing about it, or showing something about that story through your body movement, working with emotions and how we express them in our bodies or our faces. So those may be ways to open, especially if somebody's held a story for a long time. I worked with somebody recently who had 40 years in which she kept a secret, and it was about childhood abuse. And to begin to even tell that story, I had to ask her, what do you need for a safe space? We had to create some kind of sense of trust, and then telling her to, whenever she wanted to stop, giving person a sense of control over
the pace,
and when and how.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And moving on to just a different subject, what do you think the value of having a conference like this is for the people who come?
Well, all you have to do is walk in the halls, and you can feel this tremendous energy as you see people exchanging information, asking each other, saying, "Oh, where are you now? I want, Ndugo wants to hook up with your program, and I don't know where you moved to," and just a sense of possibility and ideas, but also an honoring of people who are doing this hard, frontline, day-to-day work. And I don't think they ever get enough recognition. And this is some small way to say, this is really important, what you're doing. And we have an appreciation for it, and we honor it, because we're here just to focus on that. And I think it's a way to really shift a sense of, this is really valued, even though sometimes in the larger society it's not recognized, or you're not paid a decent salary for the amount of hours you're working, etc. But it is a way to honor that as well.
And what do you enjoy about coming to a conference like this?
Meeting people from all over the world and learning from them, and it just keeps inspiring me, because I see how people are so committed to this work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for all the work that you've done with Hukoni, and over the years. We are very, very grateful, and it's been tremendous. I think that you've made a significant shift in the way we do things in practice, and now that's been shared with ever more people, and we're very grateful for that.
I'm very grateful to work with you.
Thank you.
Thanks.